This week's episode of Millions of Screens is brought to you by Lovecraft Country. For your awards consideration, the HBO original drama that Rolling Stone hails is fantastic and a genre-bending tour de force. The series stars Jonathan Majors and Journey Smollett, whose unmissable performances the site are called top-notch and USA Today calls superb. Watch the full seasons of the year's most buzzed-about drama that blurs the line between science fiction and reality in 1950s Jim Crow America. Now streaming on HBO Max.
This is millions and millions of little screens.
Can't you shut up? I'm busy. Boy, what a great show.
Hello and welcome to Millions of Screens. I'm co-producer Leo Garcia, joined via Zoom by TV Awards editor Libby Hill and TV Deputy editor Ben Travers. Today we're going to be talking about Bridgerton's big numbers over the course of its first 2 weeks on Netflix, some Golden Globes category decisions that Netflix made for The Crown, and Ted Danson being high. Getting high with Ted Danson.
Oh man, we got to work that around. We can make that a podcast.
We gotta have him on the pod. We should have had him on the pod. Skipping ahead to the clicker, our recap of the biggest news items from the past couple of weeks because we were away. But as I mentioned up top, Netflix announced its supposed numbers that Bridgerton had 63 million viewers, watchers, people who tuned in at least for 2 minutes over the course of its first 2 weeks, making it the fifth biggest show in the streamer's history. Ben, are you surprised?
No, I am not surprised. It was very well marketed, and Shonda is the shit. Plus, it has a Dairy Girls star, and people are really hungry for Dairy Girls content right now. So it hit all the quadrants that you'd need to make a successful Netflix series on December 25th, 2020.
Yeah, it was adapted from a well-received, is it a series, I think, from several decades ago. You know, it's telling a different story in that age, and while Shonda is an executive producer on it, but it definitely is in line with her shows in being very propulsive and very kind of soapy. But I don't know if that's for me. I'm not the biggest soap fan, as we were discussing earlier. That's really Ben. OC forever. So yeah, I don't. I've obviously heard very good things about it. I've heard a lot of people participating in the in the discourse around it, and those are some very impressive numbers that we can't entirely rely on coming out of Netflix. So I don't know. It doesn't strike me as a surprise at all. This is absolutely what they wanted to happen with the show, what they expected to happen with the show.
For those wondering what the top 4 shows were above Bridgerton,
Please.
They are Tiger King is at 4.
Of course it was.
Stranger Things Season 3 is at number 3. Money Heist Part 4 is at number 2.
That's wild to me.
And, I mean, these are Netflix's numbers, obviously. And number 1, I think we all know what number 1 has to be when you're talking about Netflix high viewer totals, the thing that the people want to see more of as soon as humanly possible. Yes, Libby?
The Witcher.
It is The Witcher. The Witcher is number 1 with 76 million views over the course of its first 4 weeks.
I really thought you were going to say Dairy Girls, but...
No, it was The Witcher. I'm sorry,
God, I love
Ben.
Dairy Girls.
Well, I don't want to rain on Bridgerton's parade by any means, and if these numbers are accurate, then they're fantastic, obviously, but I do think that these numbers, especially at this time of year, point more to kind of the Netflix as a utility understanding of things than anything else. Netflix, shortly before the Bridgerton announcement, also announced that The Midnight Sky, the George Clooney movie starring Kyle Chandler, among other people, also
I can't believe you didn't just call it the Kyle Chandler movie as directed by George Clooney.
Right, that would probably have been a more accurate way to phrase it.
He's like 5th or 6th on the call sheet, isn't he?
But he's number 1 in our hearts. And it got 72 million viewers, supposedly. And no one is saying that The Midnight Sky is a great movie or something that should be turned into a franchise or anything that's like, wow, this is such an amazing feat of anything. it is just the movie with George Clooney that is on over Christmas that a lot of people watched because they're home and they have Netflix. And I do feel that Bridgerton, which is
started.
Yes.
Well, they have to finish.
I think we have to be clear.
Kyle Chandler. You have to know. I don't doubt that they finished The Midnight Sky because.
All right. So there was some news coming out of Netflix that in terms of categories for awards, they're going to be submitting Josh O'Connor and Emma Corrin in lead as opposed to supporting. Libby, what does this mean in terms of, especially in lead actress? We're now, and I guess supporting, because now Gillian Anderson is sort of on her own in supporting.
Well, it is definitely rebalancing the Crown's awards push. What we know is this. Last year, neither Tobias Menzies or Josh O'Connor got a ton of awards buzz. Tobias Menzies, of course, was playing Prince Philip and was competing in lead. And O'Connor was playing Prince Charles and competing in supporting. The two have now swapped. Menzies will be competing in supporting, which makes much more sense. And O'Connor will be competing in lead. Whether or not that helps their cases at say the Golden Globes is unclear. What is clear is the thing that will help them the most is that Succession is not in competition. But the real question here is what this means for the actress and supporting actress candidates coming out of the Crown. The most shocking thing about moving Emma Corrin to lead actress is that you are putting her directly in direct competition with Olivia Colman. Olivia Colman, who is a monument now in both film and television, awarded for her an Oscar for her work in The Favourite, recognized obviously with her work with The Crown. So putting Cornyn, who played Princess Di, to very great effect is a very interesting move and feels almost like a power move, as it feels almost like a vote of no confidence for Coleman to put their maybe most breakout unseen talent from season 4 in direct competition with the Queen herself. As far as setting that aside, which is its own kind of interesting dynamic at play, moving Cornyn out of the supporting actress race seems to really clear the way for Gillian Anderson, who turned in a very lot of performance as Margaret Thatcher. I thought she was wonderful, but Thatcher is such a mannered and particular personality with a very distinct way of talking and holding herself. I thought Anderson was amazing, but I don't know if it'll connect with other people. But now that she doesn't have to face off against Cornyn, she has a much easier path, at least at the Golden Globes. The one thing is that there is always a chance of Helena Bonham Carter, who plays Princess Margaret, to throw up a challenge. Bonham Carter had kind of a singular episode, a showcase episode, if you will, to kind of justify her existence in season 4. It is not the best episode of the season, but she is doing a lot in it. If anything, it feels curious to be moving Cornyn to lead actress and not Anderson, as it feels as though Anderson takes up a much larger part of The Crown season 4. Arguably, I think that you could make the case that Cornyn, Anderson, and Coleman are all three leads of season 4, that they serve sort of a plate, like a threaded story, showing how outsiders are treated within the royal family, and then the constant that makes those decisions. But sense has no place in the awards game, so it'll be interesting to see the way this plays out, if it changes anything at all. Just a reminder, we don't know anything about anything, and the awards are still 3 to 4 months away.
Last year at the Golden Globes, as you said, so Olivia Colman did win in lead. Tobias Menzies was nominated in lead, and then Helena Bonham Carter was nominated in supporting.
Correct.
So
I would say this year,
we're way off.
I assume Coleman gets back in lead, and I assume Coleman and Cornyn get in. I assume Anderson gets in supporting. I would guess O'Connor could get in lead, just because, I don't know. And it's possible Menzies gets in too, even though I feel like we barely see him in season 4. It's possible because I'm having trouble remembering other dramas that exist at this moment. I'm sure they do, but they aren't immediately springing to mind.
That's sort of what I was leading. I was thinking, like, they have 5 actors across the categories. Could they get everyone in of those 5 that we've talked about?
I mean, they could, but there are also very serious contenders out there. You know, you just said yourself, you were talking about Lovecraft Country. HBO has plenty of contenders there, and Perry Mason, shows like that. They do exist. It all depends on what is top of mind when those voters get their ballots. And The Crown aired the most recently of all of them, so that's, I think, part of the reason it's at the tip of our tongue.
And as Ben mentioned pre-pod, maybe they'll announce some Prince Charles casting news right before voting starts. Too.
We were discussing that we still don't have an officially announced actor for season 5 and 6, I assume, for Prince Charles. The current rumor is still that star of The Wire and The Affair, Dominic West, will be filling that role, but it has yet to be confirmed. For some reason, I would expect that comes during a particularly helpful time, as The Crown always seems to drop these little news tidbits at the most beneficial time for the news cycle. So I would expect that about the time that that HFPA members start filling out their ballots. So look for that soon.
No, that was pretty much where I was going as well, because it feels to me much like they're actively positioning themselves in a position of strength, that they're trying to put their strongest players in the best chance to get all the nominations rather than pitting them against each other in any way. Like they just want to clear the way, because as you mentioned, like I laughed at it because of the phrasing that their biggest advantage is the fact that Succession isn't competing this year, but of the 5 dramas nominated last year, The Crown and Killing Eve are the only ones that remain eligible. Ozark could make like its way back into the race again, but you know, there's not a ton of like the heavyweights sitting there, and because we know that the HFPA responds so strongly to The Crown, Netflix could just be going all in and saying, listen, we think we can get all of these, so we're going to put them in a position where we feel like they're not competing against each other so much as you'd want to vote for both of them. Like you want to vote for Princess Diana and the Queen. Like you want to vote for the big names within the show as well as the people who played them. So yeah, I'll be very interested to see how it plays out. But the maneuvering is I think it's skillful. I think it's smart.
Gamesmanship. It's gamesmanship.
As Libby was just mentioning, time for the thinly sliced meat of the podcast. Ben.
You're welcome.
Ben, you've been binging for review. No?
Well, they only gave me 2 episodes.
Oh,
I don't think it counts as a binge.
Yeah, he binged it.
You binged the 2 episodes that they gave you.
Watch.
Of Mr.
44 minutes.
Mr. Mayor. The Ted Danson vehicle from Tina Fey and Robert Carlock, right? And this led to you wanting to have this conversation. Well, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about Mr. Mayor before we get into portrayals of people under the influence of marijuana? But first, tell us a little bit about Mr. Mayor and why you wanted to talk about this.
That's an excellent framework, Leo. If I didn't know for the fact that we hadn't rehearsed this, I would have expected that we had, because the screeners for Mr. Mayor start with a warning not to spoil anything. It says that all spoilers are embargoed. Don't spoil anything until after it comes out. And with a sitcom, typically that's not the focus. And with a sitcom that's this broad, I don't really even know what they mean when they say don't spoil anything. So Mr. Mayor
Does Bobby Moynihan die at the end of the pilot?
No, like I mean, I guess I can't say no because technically that's like the
negation of a spoiler would mean that it's not a spoiler.
Exactly. I don't know. I tend to think that it could be, but anyway, Mr. Mayor is a very straightforward, traditional broadcast sitcom in which an unlikely person inhabits a very important role, and in this case, it's Ted Danson's rich Los Angeles resident who made his money from billboards and then retired and then was motivated to run for mayor when the Los Angeles mayor unexpectedly quit, and he wanted to kind of inspire his daughter who thought he was just kind of a lethargic layabout who didn't do anything, even though he's just a man of a certain age who can absolutely retire and just enjoy his life after his wife passes away, but too much judgment, so he runs for office and wins. It picks up like on his first day in elected office, and his staff is trying to support him and get the right messages out there. There's a councilwoman played by Holly Hunter who is kind of the very ultra progressive left-wing instigator who just kind of picks at him to like push him in the other direction. And it's all played in this very kind of broad comic style where there's not sharply drawn lines about like he's a Democrat or Republican. There's no parties listed. There's no like the issues are big and broad enough where like they're not taking a specific stance on anything. They're both just kind of caricatures of the expected people you see in those situations. So he's an older, white-haired, rich person, but he's still progressive and accepting enough to be likable for everybody. And she's kind of just a hard line, always coming up with a reason to be mad at you, parody of a liberal progressive, but she works with everybody, and it's Holly Hunter. You love her, like she's great. So it's a very straightforward comedy, and after 2 episodes I can just say that it plays a lot like what you'd expect a Tina Fey and Robert Carlock. We conceived of this as a 30 Rock spinoff, and then it turned out Alec Baldwin may not want to do it or was asking too much, so then we changed it so it could be Ted Danson taking his place, and then we moved it to Los Angeles. It plays exactly like that on NBC, and yet the spoiler thing now has me worried that this very random funny plot development in the second episode might play as a spoiler, so consider this a spoiler warning that Ted Danson gets high in the second episode of Mr. Mayor, which airs Thursday, January 7th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And it's fantastic. Like this is the introduction to hopefully a thinly sliced meat, but a broader conversation about people who get high on TV and whether or not it's endearing or infuriating. And there's something about Ted Danson doing this, and obviously he's played just a multitude of characters over the years on television and in movies. He's done drugs as many of them, but I think to a specific generation, and honestly anybody who's a Ted Danson just super fan, bored to death is the thing you think of when you think of Ted Danson getting high. And Ted Danson getting high obsessively in Bored to Death is one of the more endearing elements of any TV show that I can think of. Like, it's just something that when you see his character enter a scene, it's like he's the Kramer sidekick sitcom character, and yet you don't know to what degree of which he's just, baked out of his gourd in that very moment. And so many of his storylines are devised around him getting pot or getting better pot or just enjoying the pot that he has. And he's got this kind of aura about him in which he can be kind of not the center of attention and kind of hanging in the background and still steal focus because he's just a star. But he can also just turn it on and off where, he can earn that spotlight if you need him to, or, drift back away from it. And in Mr. Mayor, he's doing it in a little bit more of a broad comic light. He's almost done it accidentally, and then he's put into scenarios where it could trigger him to be either, laughing when he shouldn't be laughing, or angry when he shouldn't be angry, or paranoid when he shouldn't be paranoid in these very public scenarios. And that's where a lot of the comedy comes from. But the way that Danson plays it, like, he's just so nuanced in his exact stage of being high that it adds an extra layer to it. It adds like kind of an identifiable enjoyment where you are familiar with the scenario that he's in, but you also just really enjoy watching Ted Danson play it out. And, Danson is this TV icon. He's one of the most liked people in Hollywood. He can show up on Curb Your Enthusiasm and steal a scene like that from Larry David, even in, the best of the seasons. And he can be that very authoritative, commanding central figure. He can represent just about anything you need him to. And to see him also go so far the other way with it, where he's just this giant, tall, white-haired gentleman baked out of his gourd, slinking into the background of an SUV, like just kind of like huddling into himself and appreciating the silliest things you can imagine at this unbelievably high rate. I just love it, guys. I'm sorry. I'm hoping to find something deeper within this conversation than just he's really good at it and I love it, but I think it might just be that. He's really good at it. I love it, and I'm very happy he's back doing that, even for just an episode.
Well, I think there's something to and this is coming from my very rude brain, but like there's something to like just late career Ted Danson finding humor in unexpected places. I think like a lot of the best moments of Michael on The Good Place are when he is reveling in the idiotic things that people love. I mean, the famous example is like the paper clips in the tub, but like that feels like a very like, I'm high right now. Isn't it crazy that people love these things? Like, I love these things. And I think him writing the song about the train to Funktown or whatever it is, I don't know the exact title, and like he's trying to work on various versions of that song. Like, these are all things that like a half-cocked high brain would do, and it's not said overtly in The Good Place, but like that feels like a similar energy, sight unseen, to what you were talking about in Mr. Mayor.
I mean, it is that you can appreciate the specificity of both those things. Like, you can appreciate in The Good Place who he's playing. He's playing,
spoilers.
No spoilers, but an otherworldly being who isn't familiar with these things. He's only seen them from afar, so to be able to interact with them kind of in person, so to speak, or physically, tangibly, however you want to say it, that does like elicit this kind of childlike joy. And then when he's high, it's like the person he is, like, he's still so much in character. It's not like he's allowing himself to just become like, oh, I'm goofy now. Oh, I'm just scared now. Like, he doesn't just kind of have a general sheen of doing it. He can still apply, as an actor should, he can still apply situationally to the state of mind that this person is in. And, yeah, like he's just very good at it. He's both very convincing, and then he's able to elicit these reactions almost always that are unique to that moment. So it's like you can keep appreciating it instead of it being nostalgic, where you're just dipping back and seeing him do it again. It's not like when he was on The Good Place and he played a bartender, and you're like, they were very subtle about it, but you're still sitting there going, ooh, we get to see him be a bartender again. That's pretty cool. It's not like that. It's very much like a new discovery each time he gets high or does something kind of silly and throwback. So, anyway.
But before we start recording...
The Good Place was just exclusively made for stoners, right? I'm just thinking about the cactus gag.
Uh-huh.
And... it makes me laugh every time.
I mean, The Good Place.
And,
The Good Place was envisioned by a stoner.
I would say that that kind of gag, though, is the thing that I could see someone getting stuck on, and then you miss the humor as it keeps going. Like, you are still thinking about how funny that one moment was, but the episode has progressed, and if you're... So, anyway.
But before we start recording, Ben's wanting to talk about how good Ted Danson is in Mr. Mayor at portraying someone under the influence. Sparked various other thoughts. Libby, do you want to talk about a portrayal of someone who's high that you think is really excellent?
Yeah, actually I have two, because as Ben was talking, I thought about an old pull of one of the best sitcom episodes. It is definitely up there for sitcom episodes, but also one more recently, which is when the most recent season of Better Things, we see Sam get medical marijuana and kind of lose her shit. There is something very amusing, I think, about seeing people of a certain age, people who very well can or probably were stoners back in their old life, re-encountering pot as adults or as more refined citizens. And there's something about that I can't think of the word. There is something about that dissonance that is so inherently funny, which is just, is a testament to, say, Ted Danson's talent, but it is an inherently funny premise for all of the reasons that you outlined, Ben. And I think the same thing is true with Adlin. She's very, it's very small things, and she really captured the panic of when you realize you're high, but then the panic of realizing you're way too high, which I thought was very beautiful. But talking about that reminded me of an old episode of Roseanne called A Stash from the Past, when Dan and Roseanne find weed that they're afraid was the kids, and then they realize it was their old stash that they had put there, and they and a very, very obviously fictionally pregnant Jackie, the wonderful Laurie Metcalf, get high, and they don't know how to handle it. It's very amusing. Jackie at one point thinks, because she is so pregnant and sitting in the bathtub, that everything has shrunk around her, that she's just huge. And there's something about John Goodman and Laurie Metcalf being under the influence of marijuana, because it's different than playing drunk. It is a step removed. It is a little less familiar and accessible to many people. And it's something that, we didn't really allow on television a lot until we got much closer to the legalization of marijuana. And so it is still always such a treat to see people playing in that in that sandbox, when it's not like high maintenance or or things
Broad
that
City.
it's definitely baked in.
Yeah. Ooh.
Right.
But
nailed
Baked
it.
in.
It's also worth mentioning that, like you said, because it's not as immediately or presumably as familiar to a lot of people who are watching. It's treated that way by a lot of people, in that, in plenty of shows, when somebody gets high or stoned or whatever, it's like the writers are given an excuse to do whatever they want with that. They don't have to try to look at it from well, what would they actually be like, or how would that actually affect them? It just lets them be well, they can be as loopy and weird and crazy and see things and all this stuff as we want them to be. So one of the things that was great about Adlon's interpretation of it was that she also had to direct herself in that scene. So she made a lot of choices with how that scene was shot, and kind of the way that the camera started to move, especially along its axis, that would emphasize the state that she was in without, betraying the reality of it for her. So I really liked seeing that as well. I liked seeing kind of not only is she going to go to that very comic place of I've gotten way too high and I don't know what to do, even though eventually she does handle it pretty well. But we're going to see the interpretation of that from somebody who wants to treat it not seriously, but treat it realistically. And I feel like Danson dials into that same wavelength, where it's I really want to understand how this person would be feeling in this moment. I don't want to just be given a license to do whatever I want. I want to have the specific thing to work with and then go from there. And that's what, a really good actor can do. So it's nice to see those portrayals. And
I think to Libby's point, like about as we move closer to, legalization across all 50 states, as whenever that happens, like we're still currently in the silver age, I'd say, of like marijuana on television. And I think like if you think back to like the earliest filmed versions of people being drunk, it's obviously super cartoonish. It's the hiccup. It's the asleep in a trough or whatever. Like it's just like these insane things that like don't really happen to everyone. And I think then as we've gone along, we've gotten more accurate portrayals that can be used for both dramatic and comedic tellings. I think the same thing will happen with pot as it becomes something that is less. I used to hate when you'd see portrayals of marijuana. It's like it felt like it was LSD, and it's like that's not quite what it is. That's like all these other drugs that don't do the things that pot does, just because it was like this catch-all for like this is a psychedelic trip,
illegal.
Yeah,
drug.
here's a trip. It's just like mushrooms. But it's like those are all very different things. And so I think as it becomes legal, as more people experience it, they'll notice that like it is different, it is nuanced, and there's plenty of comedy and drama to be mined therein. It just takes a little bit of digging. I don't have a cool pun like Libby had. You gotta chuck out. You gotta scrape out the resin to get the real solid nugs. The dank nugs. That's where the dank nugs are.
You didn't have a cool one like Libby did.
I've never partaken. I have no idea. Millions of Screens is a production of the Penske Media Corporation and IndieWire. Theme music features excerpts of the classic YouTube video Bjork Talking About TV and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Our editor-in-chief is Dana Harris-Brightson. Our publisher is James Israel. And our executive editor is Ann Donahue. Our favorite stars of The Crown that we hope to see reprise their performances in Season 6 are Jared Harris, Vanessa Kirby, and Olivia Colman. Millions of Screens endorses Elizabeth Debicki in anything. I gotta see Widows. I gotta watch Widows. You can find us on Twitter at A Million Screens, at Midwest Spitfire, at Ben T. Travers, and at Leo Edgar Garcia. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. So leave a review and let us know what you think. This has been Libby and Leo. Remind you as always that you shouldn't let poets lie to you.
You shouldn't let poets lie to you.
Ain't nothing wrong with a couple of cold brews and a cool podcast.